Good morning, Lissa, and welcome to the Calm and Courageous podcast, a parent's guide to powerful allyship in raising children with disabilities. Thank you so much for joining me today. I've been excited and really wanting you to be a part of this podcast. Could you tell us a little bit
Yeah.
about you and the Black Death Project?
Yes. Thank you so much for inviting me and us to this space. I'm excited to chat with you this morning. So yeah, my name is Lissa Ramirez-Stapleton. She and her pronouns work well for me. And I'm the executive director for the Black Deaf Project. We are an hearing educational nonprofit. We will be 2 years old, April 12th this year. So excited for that next milestone. But
Congratulations.
we thank you. Yeah, but we are yeah, an educational based nonprofit. So we focus on creating educational resources, books, flashcards, history posters, Black centered resources for parents and young people and teachers. We also are big on educational experiences. So we have international trips. This year we're going to Jamaica in a couple of weeks. And so the goal is to be able to connect with other Black, deaf folks across the world for cultural solidarity, joy. And then lastly, we do quite a bit in terms of like workshops and community outreach. And so that looks like trying to bring Black culture, ideology, ways of life into educational spaces. And so we will host events such as Kwanzaa, and we do that all in sign language. And again, trying to make things accessible for Black folks, but really all deaf people to get access to the resources. So yeah, Kwanzaa, we Black Children's Book Week, and we make sure that we are promoting signing and Black deaf books in Black in those weeks, right? So it's really about going into Black spaces and trying to hold space for signers and deaf people, and then going into deaf spaces that are oftentimes not Black centered and trying to hold space for Black people. Um,
Listen, last year I met you at the Literacy and Love event at Cody. And Cody, for those of you that don't know, is the Center of Deafness in the Inland Empire. I think I said that correctly. But that's where we met. And
yes.
what inspired
Mhm.
you to want to be an advocate for the Black deaf community, to be an ally?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a hearing person, people often ask me like, so you must have someone deaf in your family. It's like, no, actually I don't, not in my immediate family. I think that's changed now in terms of chosen family, but not in terms of my immediate family. But I was introduced to the deaf community in high school at a leadership, like a drug president, and they invited the deaf residential school that year. And it was my first interaction with deaf people, interpreters, and it changed the trajectory of my life. And it's interesting because that group of us that went that weekend, many of us are connected with the deaf community now because of that one weekend. People are interpreters, people actually have deaf children. Like it's a really interesting, when we had a reunion, people were just like, oh yeah, me too. Oh yeah, 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 that weekend. So it was a profound weekend for many of us and all Black kids. Um, and so from there, I took, an undergrad, I took American Sign Language, and doors kept opening. And so for me, when I think about that question, I actually went to Ghana for 3 months trying to answer that question of like, it's not good enough to say, oh, I want to be involved, I want to be an ally. Like that it didn't feel like that's actually what was happening. And so I actually went to Ghana for 3 months and I worked at a deaf residential school to figure out my why. And sat with that, reflected on that. And what I came back with really a lot of clarity is that our liberation or interconnect any particular group within our community or even outside of our community is oppressed, then we all are oppressed. And so like collectively we have to move through. And I also really realized that using my hearing privilege to push against autism and to push and educate hearing people move that ball quicker than when I was trying to do Black women's work. And I felt like I was just constantly hitting a wall and realizing, okay, my privilege is going to move this liberation journey faster if I push here, and then I need somebody else to push on my front, and how we all have to work together to help free each other, to free each other. And so for me, I don't in any ways think that I am ahead of deaf people or responsible in that type of way, but more so like I try to educate hearing people. So with the nonprofit, any organization we work through or work with to do any of our programming, particularly with hearing people who have no experience with deaf people, like we train them beforehand so that deaf people don't have to do that lifting. So we deal with hearing people and their issues of inappropriate communication, inappropriate language, and we cut that off before they engage with deaf people, so deaf people don't have to navigate that because deaf people are navigating other things. Um, I'm open to being in the front. I'm open to being on the side. I'm open to being in the back. I prefer to be in the back. But really being in relationship is really what is important and a better understanding like what do people need. Sometimes they need you to get out of the way. Some people need you to open doors or ask hard questions. And so just really being in really what my role is and to be humble about that. And, sometimes those interactions are not positive because the people have had a lot of historical and current day issues with hearing people, right? That's been oppressive and hurtful. Um, and so you have to have a tough skin. It's not personal. People are navigating their lives, just like when I'm engaging as a Black woman in white spaces. Um, and so, yeah, just I'm wanting to be in relationship and on the journey with folks for our collective liberation, and that we can't do it alone. We have to do it together. And so many Black people, I always laugh because I feel like every Black person has a different cousin that, and it's just like, have that people have no way to communicate with. Oh yeah, I don't know. Yeah, no one in our family ever learned sign language. Oh yeah, I don't really know how they navigate it. And so these moments like in community, we have work to do. We have work to do.
Listen, when I first met you, I was so excited because, we know that deafness is a low incidence disability. And I use the term disability. I know that not all deaf people use that term. They don't consider themselves to be disabled, but I choose to use that for my family and for my kids as I'm navigating their education and how to better support them. And I was excited because within that deaf community, I didn't find many faces of color initially. And so being able to find an organization that was very specific in supporting and partnering and coming alongside and getting behind and educating other hearing people was exciting for me. And this podcast is about educating able-bodied people or people who are not navigating life with maybe hearing loss or blindness or any type of difference that affects their body and how they interact with the world. Just educating them because there's so much ableism and autism and fear. And to be honest with you, I didn't know anything about the deaf community. When I found myself in a place where I had two children with hearing loss, I realized I had so much ignorance around deafness and fear. And I realized when I would talk to other people, their immediate thing is, how do we fix this? Right? Is there a surgery? Is
Yeah.
there some type of medicine? How did this happen? How do we make it go away? And when I started to learn about the deaf community and learn about the culture, all of that fear fell away from me. And it actually made me excited and empowered. And I
Mm.
love how you said, if I'm not trying to be a savior to the deaf community, but what I am trying to do is to educate hearing people, because that's where the real work needs to be done. Okay. And so I love that. And so
Yeah.
that's what this podcast is about. So thank you for sharing that and educating us on what it is that your organization is doing. Another question that I wanted to ask, what do you think just from your work? And again, if I start to break up, it's something with the internet connection this morning. So I'm sorry, but I'll come back.
Yeah,
Um,
no worries.
okay. What do you think the biggest, from what you're seeing as a hearing person on this journey alongside in support of as an ally? Because again, we know you can't speak for the deaf community, but from what you're observing and from what you've heard, what do you think is one of the biggest challenges that they're facing today? Just in navigating the
Mm.
education, society,
Yeah.
something that you hear often.
Yeah, I mean, I think language deprivation is still an issue. Getting children between the ages of 0 and 5 access to language, because 90% of deaf kids are born to hearing parents who oftentimes the first deaf person they're meeting is their child, right? And so um, there's a lot of potential barriers to knowledge, particularly when parents' first educators are doctors and social workers and sometimes audiologists that are not deaf friendly, that instill a lot of fear and unknowing, right? And I tell people all the time, particularly when they're talking about parents of color, because I think oftentimes parents of color are labeled as not loving their children or not wanting the best for them or not caring. And I said that's absolutely not the case. I think parents of color, Black parents love their children, and they are faced with lots of barriers that make sense to them, right? And so there's so much fear in the beginning that it sets young people up in ways that are not fair, right, for their potential, because parents are trying to do their best and yet they're met with, let's fix them. They're not going to be able to do this. They're not going to do that. I mean, all the knots then they're not going to be able to do on top of the fact of being Black, on top of the fact of being, you put gender and everything else on top of that. Like, it can be terrifying for parents and really overwhelming for parents. Innovation is huge in terms of getting language to kids, getting language to parents, helping parents understand the how crucial it is that 0 to 5. And yeah, I was just talking to a mom the other day. She's like, those first years, I was just so scared. I was literally, I was like paralyzed. I was just so afraid that I
Paralyzing,
was
yes.
gonna like, you know, hurt her. Like, you know what I mean? Like I was trying to make the best decision, therefore I made no decision.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like those years went by.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you're almost like you're in shock.
Mhm.
It's almost like a trauma response because it's unexpected.
Mhm.
And if you don't have the proper support
Mhm.
of someone to come alongside you to say, oh, okay, here is how you navigate that. Instead of trying to fix it. I think that is what we find a lot. And this, I'm just sharing my experience
Sure.
in going to the doctor, getting the diagnosis, and or learning that they have the different hearing levels or hearing difference or they're deaf, and then immediately saying, okay, we have to aid you, we have to work on your speech, we have to get that spoken language in, we have to get that part of your brain, of that, that auditory part of your brain working. It's so much focus on that that you you don't want to interfere with that. So then a lot of parents don't learn American Sign Language because they don't want to get in the way of them
Yeah.
speaking, of them learning language.
Yep.
And I think
Yep.
that uh, you are paralyzed because you don't want to make the wrong choice. And then in my son's case, it caused him to have like some behaviors. So I don't know if it was like he had some sensory needs, because we know that sometimes children who have hearing loss can have some other sensory things. I don't know if it was because of that. I don't know if it was because he was having a hard time expressing himself, but he just had just some outbursts, some aggression. Now we don't see any of that, but now he has a lot more language. He can express himself. We're doing both spoken and ASL, so maybe that's what's helped him. He's matured. He's doing wonderful. His teacher emails me regularly to say he's doing so great. I Miss Bauer at Mountain View Elementary School, shout out to you.
Great
Thank,
teachers make a difference.
thank you, God, for that woman. And so that this so much can happen with children who are deaf and hard of hearing if they don't have the support. And if people around them don't have the education. I was just telling someone that just because someone is a special education teacher doesn't mean they have knowledge about hearing loss. And
Mhm.
that's also very debatable because someone who's deaf doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be in a class, a special education class. It could
Yeah.
mean that they need to be at a deaf school. It could mean that they need to be in the classroom with
Mhm.
accommodations. There's no one, there's no deaf people are the same. Everyone's different.
Right.
And so like
Right.
hearing people, like any other thing. And I
Yeah.
think that it's a lack of education and exposure and representation
Yes.
that is the real issue.
Yeah. Because there's also not a lot of conversation about the intersection of race, right? And I think that that piece is really important because you can be in a space that is so helpful and rich for your deaf, neglecting your racialized ethnic identity that is also really important for young people. You know, there's several, I say another issue is not just language deprivation, but cultural deprivation, particularly for our kids of color who don't get access to cultural knowledge. Um, most of our, and really generally speaking, most of our teachers are white women, and that, you know, deaf education is not excluded from that. Um, and then the parents haven't learned sign language, or there hasn't been some way to communicate, learn a way to deaf education has a pretty white-centric curriculum. I think here in California, we're hoping that that changes soon with the ethnic studies requirement, but that's only a high school requirement, right? And
Yeah.
so one class, high school, before you graduate. And so again, where are our young people of color getting that information? And so we, two things I wanted to share. One, before we get too far, I think that Lead K is a really good
Yeah.
resource for folks, right? So I don't know if you've talked about that on your show. So language, equality, and acquisition for deaf, doing a lot of really great work around providing resources for parents around getting language to kids 0 to 5, providing language markers so that, you know, who knew that like there all this time there hasn't actually been language markers for kids to see if they're progressing in American Sign Language. We have that for verbal languages, but we didn't have that for sign language until Lead K. And so they've done some really amazing work that I think is a great resource for parents. Um, so I kind of digressed to
Great.
share that, but
Like
in terms of Culture Brilliant and College Bound tour, which we've been doing for 5 years now, it's a Black deaf-centered college experience, immersive experience for 2.5 days. And we go to two colleges, so one 4-year and one 2-year. But we do a whole lot of other stuff on top of that. So we have a Black Deaf alumni panel so kids can see like other people like them have done it. We do a lot of like how do you navigate college campus through interactive games and activities and case study giving them different clues and hints of how they kind of navigate spaces, but super hands-on. And one of the big feedbacks we always get from kids is that, you know, it was just good to learn about being Black and deaf. It was good to learn about my Black identity. It was good to talk about that. It was good to be around other people who look like me, like, because that piece is missing. And that's that cultural deprivation piece that um, so many kids don't get access to that like level of richness and like, you know, there's not just two of us, you know, or just me, or, you know, like, we're important in terms of deaf kids of color.
yeah, and that's common, in families. It's just me. And honestly, I was glad that I had two children who were hard of hearing because they had each other.
Yeah.
And I didn't want either one of them to feel like, oh, it's just me.
Mhm.
Even though we consider ourselves to be a deaf family, we just say we are together, we are doing this together. This is not you alone. We
Mhm.
are coming to learn you and learn your community. I don't need you to always have to work to be in the hearing world. And that's our goal, is for everyone to realize this is all of ours. We're carrying this together as a team and as a family. And when you accept deafness, and it's not this thing to be afraid of, that would be the goal. That would be my prayer for
Yeah.
people. But of course, families are afraid because if you don't have resources and the
Yeah.
support, you always feel like, well, what do I do? And
Yeah.
so, yeah, I'm glad you mentioned Lead K. And I'm glad that you mentioned that cultural piece because we know what community does for people. We know
Yeah.
that when you feel like you are in a team, a tribe, you're empowered. There's nothing like being around people who are like you, who have similar backgrounds and experiences.
Yeah.
And we don't have a lot more time, but one of the things I wanted to ask you, when you notice that children who maybe didn't have access to ASL early on, and maybe parents are learning at 5, 6, 7, 8, okay, this is something that I need to start incorporating. What advice would you give to these parents? Because there's a lot of parents, particularly Black, Latino communities, and all cultures, who maybe were going the auditory or going the spoken language route and notice, okay, my child needs more language. We're going to start incorporating ASL. What advice would you give those families? How to start and how to help them fill those gaps?
Say to them, oh, sorry. The one thing I think I always say to parents when I'm chatting with them is that it's not too late. It's not too late. So yes, all the science says it has to be before 5. Yes, yes, yes. And it's not too late. Like we can still keep working on this. There are plenty of deaf people I have met that also have experienced language deprivation, didn't get access to sign language till middle school, till high school, till college, right? Who are still successful, who are still contributing leaders, and that science is science. And I think our just believing in something greater than yourself, right? Greater than science, that like we still have a responsibility to them to 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 set them up for success. And so much of that is believing they can do it, right? That yes, there may be challenges, yes, things may be more difficult, but that doesn't mean it's impossible. And so I just always want to, I think sometimes parents, there's a grieving process, right? Which is,
Yeah,
I was talking to someone else about the like parent of what they thought their life was going to look like with their child, the life their child, whatever they envisioned, um, that ultimately this is not a sad thing. This is not this can turn into something really, really amazing. And I think people have to be given permission to grieve
yeah,
and not to grieve in front of your children, right? Like so there's this balance of like parents have a right to feel, and in the same sense your child where it lands that those feelings of like disappointment, sadness. I didn't expect that. Like you got to find a space to do that in,
yeah, absolutely.
and then you have to show up for your child in a way that we can do this.
You can do this,
We
and
can
this
do
is
this.
how
You
you
can do
are.
this.
Yeah,
Yes, that cult, like we're gonna figure this out together. There's culture around this, there's pride, there's possibility, there's like you have gifts and talents that you bring to this world that are different than other people, right? So parents have to show up like that for their kids, and they have to figure out their grieving someplace else.
I love that. I love
And you have to work through family support group. You got to do that part, and you got to show up for your kids. And so I think that it's not too late. You've got to be an advocate. So every door that shuts, you just keep looking for doors that open. You just keep knocking. You have to know your rights. You have to know your kids' rights. Particularly in this current political climate, you've got to know what is what's optional and what's actually not optional. What is an opinion and what is actually like the law, right? And so I think parents and finding each other to be in collaboration and solidarity with each other.
that. Because of that, we have to go. We don't have much more time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being on the Common Courageous podcast. I could talk with you for hours.
I love talking with you
Or
too.
of the people who are listening or watching. Again, I'm sorry about the internet connection. I'm going to work on that. But um, you are like, it's so refreshing. I text her all the time. I'm always asking her questions. And sometimes I just want to talk to you
Yeah.
just to have someone who gets it,
Yeah.
just to have an ally in common,
Yeah.
that I can say, hey, listen, this is what I'm experiencing. I'm not saying you have the answer, but I know that you care. And I'm grateful and thank you for the work you're doing. And thank you for your mentoring to me because this advocacy work and this allyship work is new to me. And you're modeling for me a way to best serve and support my kids and my family and their culture. And I just thank you for making that journey so much lighter for me and so much, you just, you make me excited about all of this. And my
Yeah.
kids make me excited. And
Yeah.
so, again, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Yeah, thank you for having me and being in community with me. I appreciate that because I don't have deaf children, so I think this is where the relationship piece is really important, right? Like
Absolutely.
that we can support each other, like everyone's bringing something different to the table. And this idea of being co-conspirators, right? So that we're actually more than allies. Like co-conspirators actually have to
Co-conspirator.
get into the game, right? You have to sacrifice. You have to be willing to get your hands dirty, if you will, in terms it's not just like, oh, I'm here when things are going well. It's like, no, co-conspirators are all in the good and the not so good, and kind of knowing your space and doing the work around your own hearing privilege and understanding autism and that the whole journey, all the pieces. So I appreciate you because it's so important to have Black families that are like, no, we stand right here and we're gonna keep pushing and you're gonna see us and you're gonna hear us and we're not gonna back down. Like our kids deserve to have the best in this life. And so I appreciate you.
You too. And that's a perfect place to end. Thank you so much, Lissa. And thank you guys for listening to the Calm and
Yeah.
Courageous podcast. I hope you'll join us again next time.
Bye.